Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we'll be able to perform all the CRUD operations in our application using React and Redux. So CRUD simply stands for create, read, update and delete. We'll be able to create new resources in our database. We'll then be able to read those resources from the database and display them on the UI. And then we'll be able to update or edit a particular resource from the database and display the changes on the UI, and also we'll be able to delete a particular resource. And for us to do all this, we'll need to set up React and Redux. And React and Redux are completely different libraries, so we will need another library called React Redux for us to bind React and Redux together. We'll also create a Redux store, and a Redux store will act as a single source of truth of our application state. So we'll have a central place where we'll store the state globally, and we can access this state from any other component in our application. And we'll also create some reducers, and a reducer is simply a function which have access to the state and the actions, and it can use the state, the current state and the action arguments to update the application state. And for us to actually update the state in our reducers, we'll need to dispatch actions. Okay, so what will happen is that we will for example click on a button, e.g. creating a new to-do, and then we'll dispatch an action creator after clicking that button. And with the help of Redux Dunk, we will halt that dispatch, perform an async action, for example access the database and save a particular to-do, and then get a response. Once we get a response, we'll be able to continue with the dispatch, and we'll dispatch an action which will have a type and a payload. And then we can check the type and the payload from our reducers with the help of this parameter. We can say something like action.type and update the state accordingly. So we'll see how we'll do all this in this particular video. Now we will be consuming some form of backend APIs, which are CRUD operation APIs. And we have already created these APIs using Node.js, Express and MongoDB. So if you have no any information about it, you can go to my channel and then scroll at the bottom here, and you'll see this section where I have pinned this entire series. You can click on Manstack tutorial with Auth, and you land to a page like this one where we have all the videos in this series. And from #0 to #13 is where we created our backend. So we were able to create an Express server, we connected to MongoDB, we were able to create the endpoints for handling CRUD operation, so handling post request, get request, delete, put, patch. We checked at joy data validation and testing API endpoints using Postman. And then in this video #13 is where we created our Auth API endpoints using Node.js and JWT, which is a 1-hour video. And then after that is where we got started with React. We learned about React router and created our UI using Material UI. So this is our UI here. And now it's time that we add logic to this UI so that we can create a new to-do and perform these other CRUD operations. So make sure you check this one out and go through these videos so that you can be up to date to where we are at this point. In case you're new here, my name is Charles. I am a JavaScript developer, a coffee lover, and I create coding content here on YouTube. Now that sounds awesome, so please make sure you subscribe and turn on post notification so that you don't miss any of my videos. In case you have a question, you can always leave a comment at the comment section below, or you can find me on Twitter at Chaoo. Also, please make sure you leave a thumbs up if you like this video, and in the next section we'll be able to get started with setting up React and Redux. So in this section, I want us to set up React and Redux, and the first step that you'll take is to open a new terminal and run this command to install these 3 libraries. To install Redux, React Redux, and as I said before, React Redux will help us to bind React library and Redux library, and also Redux Dunk. And Redux Dunk is a middleware which will help us to perform async actions in our action creators. So we'll see how we'll do that later on. Once you install these three libraries, the next step is to make use of them. So I can close this terminal, and we can start by creating a Redux store. So to create a Redux store, we will import a create store method from the Redux library. So right here, I'll say import create store, and I'll also import apply middleware so that we can configure our Redux Dunk library too. Okay. So you import create store and apply middleware, and this is from the Redux library. Just like that. And now we can use this create store to create a Redux store. And a Redux store is where our application state will reside. So we'll have a central place where we'll have the entire state, and we can access the state from any other component in our application. So right here you can say const store will be equal to create store. We invoke this one, and the first parameter is a root reducer. And a root reducer is a combination of our different reducers that we will have in this application. So we will have a todos reducer and also an auth reducer, and a combination of these two reducers is what will be included in our root reducer. So right here I can say root reducer. We will create this one in a minute, so just pass root reducer. And then the second parameter is where we can make use of apply middleware and configure our Redux Dunk. So right here I can say apply middleware. We invoke this, and in here we pass our Redux Dunk. So let's import something from Redux Dunk. We will say import Dunk from Redux Dunk. And then we pass this Dunk just in here. Now let's create this root reducer. I'll come to the root of our application, and inside the SLC folder, I'll create a new folder called store. So everything to do with Redux store will be included in this folder. That includes action creators and reducers. So inside this store folder, I'll create a new folder for our reducers. And then inside the reducers, we can now create a new file called root reducer. .js. And as I told you before, root reducer will simply combine our different reducers in this application. And since we are dealing with CRUD operations in this video, we will create a reducer called todos reducer, which will handle our CRUD operations. So right here I'll say to do reducer.js. Later on, we'll add another reducer called auth reducer for authentication, but for now this will be good enough to set up our React and Redux libraries. Okay. Now let's enter to the to-do reducer, and a reducer is simply a function which have access to state and also action, and we can use those two parameters to update the state. So right here all we will do is to create a function called to-do reducer, which will be equal to, we accept several parameters. The first one is the state, and we can default the state to an empty object or an array. And then the second parameter here is action, and we can use this to access the action arguments, e.g. action.type, action.payload, and update the state accordingly depending on those arguments. Okay. So we have state and action, and this is supposed to be an arrow function. And in here is where now you can update the state. But for now, we don't want to do anything complex. So we'll simply return the state, and then later on we'll come here and update the state depending on an action which was performed. Okay, so right here I'm simply returning the state, and then at the bottom here we should export this to do reducer. So I'll say export default to do reducer, just like that. I guess everything is fine, and now we can import this to do reducer inside our root reducer. So I'll come to the root reducer and import our to do reducer. So I'll say import to do reducer, and this will be from, they are in the same folder, so to do reducer. And then we need to import something from the Redux library, which is combine reducers, so that we can be able to combine our different reducers. Okay, so right here I'll simply say import combine reducers, and this will be coming from the Redux library. This is supposed to be from. Now we can make use of these combine reducers. So I'll come at the bottom here, I'll create a constant called root reducer. We set it to be equal to combine reducers. We invoke this as a method, and we pass an object in here, and this is where we can combine our different reducers. This is supposed to be const. So right here I'll set our to do reducer to be to do's. Okay, so to do's to do reducer. You can leave it as a to do reducer, but to do's sounds more fun, so we'll be accessing the to do's state using this one. And now we have our root reducer set. All we need to do is to export it. So export default root reducer. Okay, later on we'll be able to import our auth reducer and include it in here. Okay, now let's come back to our index.js file, and we import that root reducer in this file. So I'll say import root reducer from, we enter the store folder, we access the reducers, and then root reducer. Just like that. So now we have our root reducer imported right here. Okay, and remember, root reducer is simply combining our different reducers. So we'll also add all the reducer in here later on, but for now we just want something simple so that we can create the store. Right now we are successfully creating the store, and what remains is to make our application aware of this store. And for that we will use our React Redux library. So I'll import something from the React Redux library, which is a provider component. So I'll say import provider, and this is from the React Redux library. Okay, as I told you earlier, React Redux is acting as a binding layer of our React library and our Redux library. So this is a component, and we can wrap our app using this component right here. So I can say provider, and we need a closing tag. Okay, there we go. I move this app in here just to wrap it inside the provider component, and then I can indent nicely just like that. For our application to be aware of our store, we need to pass this store as a prop inside our provider component. So right here, I'll set the store to be equal to store. And that's it. That is how we set up React and Redux in our application. And now in the next section, I want us to try and create a new to-do in the database. So we'll talk about action creators and we'll talk more about reducers, okay? But for now, we can check if our application still works without errors. I'll check if it's compiled. And we have an error here, React Redux. So we need to wrap this one inside quotes. Yep. And let's see if we have any other error. And oops, combined reducer is not defined. So we made a mess again. So let me fix this real quick. I'll come to the root reducer. This is supposed to be combined reducers. So these are just typos. Make sure that you don't have these errors in your application. Okay, I hope everything is fine now. So our application still works. I can hit F12 to see if there are any errors in the console or warnings. So our console is clean and our application is working. So in the next section, let's see how we can add a to-do in the database. So in the last section, we were able to integrate Redux in our React app. And in this section, I want us to try and add a new to-do to the database. And to do that, we'll be working with our add to-do component here. And we'll try to read the values that we enter in our text field. We'll make use of useState hook. So at the top here, we can import useState from React library, okay? So useState. And then at the bottom here, we can set up some default state. And what we can say is use state. We invoke it and pass an object in here. Our to-do will contain a name, and we can set the name to be an empty string. And also we'll have is complete, which is Boolean. And by default, it will be false. So by default, a to-do will not be complete. So for now, we'll just have this default state, and I'll show you how we'll add the date, okay? And this use state hook will return an array, and we can destructure some properties from that array. So I can say const an array. We will have a to-do, which will represent this object or our to-do, and then we'll have set to do, which is a method for updating our to do, okay? So now we can make use of this 2 at the bottom here, and I should include an equal sign here, okay? First of all, I'll set a value which will be equal to do dot name. So this to do dot name, an empty string. So this is the default. And then we will use an onChange event to update our value. So we can say onChange, which will be equal to, I include an object here, and I pass a function which accepts E for event. And then this will be an arrow function, and we can now call our set to do right here to update our to do state, okay? So I'll call this one, pass an object. I spread the properties of our to do using the spread operator. So 3 dots and then to do. And then what I want us to update is the name. So right here I use a comma, and then I set the name to be e.target.value. So every time we type on that input field, our name will be updated to that particular value. And another thing that we can do is to set a date. So right here we can set the date to be equal to new date. And yeah, that's about the onChange. And once we click the submit button, we should include an onSubmit event at our form here, okay, so that we run a handler function. So right here at our form tag, I can include an onSubmit event, and this will run the handle submit function. So handle submit, just like that. Currently we don't have this function, so we can create it at the top here. So just at the top of our return statement here, we can create a function const handle submit, which will accept event, and then in here we can do something. The first thing that we will do is to prevent the page from refreshing when submitting the form by saying e.prevent default, and then we invoke this just like that. And then in here we can take the updated value of our to-do and log it to the console. So right here I can say console.log to do, and then after we log this to the console, we can reset our values for the form. So we can say set to do to be the default values here, name to be an empty string, and the is complete to be false. And then I can include a comma here, and I'm not sure why this is bringing an issue. I am not sure. Okay, this is supposed to be an arrow function right here, that way. So we are preventing the page from reloading, we are logging the to-do to the console, and then we are resetting our to-do. So let's try and see if we can log a to-do to the console. So I'll come to the browser here, and date is not defined. So I'll come back here and then scroll at the bottom. We should change this date to have a capital D. Yeah, this is a global method which is available to us, so it should be defined. Now when I come back after the refresh, these errors should disappear. Okay, the value here, we should include this bracket so that it's not a string. We are trying to read this name. It should be this way. We include these curly brackets so that we can read this to do dot name. Not this one, but for right here, to do dot name. So yeah, and now let's try to create a to do here, maybe new to do. When we submit, we should get an output right here. So send, our form clears, and when I check my console, we have a date for our to do, we have is complete, and we have the name of our to do, which is new to do. Perfect. So we are able to get our to do. So what we will be doing is that we will be dispatching an action creator right here, okay, and then passing the to do to that action creator. So first of all, we need to create an action creator, and we'll do that inside our store folder. So I can expand this, and then I'll create a new folder inside the store folder called actions, and then inside the action folder I'll create a new file called to do actions, and this is where we'll have all our action creators for our to-dos. Press enter, and now in here is where we are going to create an action creator for adding a new to-do. Now before we do this, I need you to install a library which is Axios. So just run this in your terminal, npm I Axios, npm I Axios, and hit enter to install Axios in your application. I have already installed, and I'm assuming you already know how to install modules or libraries in your application. Okay, install Axios because we'll need it in this file. And then in your SLC folder, you'll create a new folder called API. Okay, so this API folder, and then you create an index.js file inside the API folder. And what you will do is that you'll create a constant which is a URL and set it to this string http localhost 5000 /API, and this is trying to hit our backend endpoint or our backend API. Okay, and you also make sure that you export it, because we'll also need this one in this particular file to do actions.js. So in this file, the first thing that you will do is to import Axios, assuming that you have already installed it. So import Axios from Axios, and we'll use Axios to perform HTTP requests. So you import Axios, and then you import the URL, which is for our endpoint URL, and this is from the API folder. Okay, so I'll say stroke, and then we can access the API folder right here. And this should access our URL, because inside the API folder we only have index.js and we don't need to include anything else at the front. Now that we have Axios and the URL imported, at the bottom here we can create an action creator for adding a new to-do. So we'll say something like export const add to do. Now this is the name of our action creator, will be equal to, right here we'll be receiving a to do from our add to do component, so we can pass that to do right here, and we set this one to be an arrow function, and we can do something in here. So remember earlier we configured Redux Dunk, which is a middleware in our application. And Redux Dunk, what it does, it allows us to return a function inside our action creator. So right here we can return a function. So return an arrow function. And this arrow function will have access to these parameters, dispatch. And this dispatch simply continues the dispatch of our actions, and we'll also have access to get state, and we can use this get state to read our application state from the Redux store in case we need it. So at this point in here we can be able to perform an async action using Axios, and this is why we used Redux Dunk in this application. If we don't have Redux Dunk, we wouldn't be able to return a function in here, and if we tried, we'll get an error. Okay, so right here what we can do is to use Axios and use the post method to post a new resource to the database. I can include this on a new line to clearly read it, and then the first parameter is our URL, and we have imported the URL here. And what I'll do is that I'll use the backtick so that I can read this URL and include something in front of it, okay, or simply merge a string. So use some backticks, and then use the $sign and the curly brackets. We read our URL, and at the front here we can include stroke to-dos. And now we are tapping on our to-dos API. Again, if you don't know how we created this to-dos API, make sure you check out the other videos in this particular playlist or this particular series. Okay, so this is the first parameter of our post method, the endpoint, and then the second parameter is our to-do. So you can simply say to-do. For this to-do, we can also include an author and a UID, and I'll show you how we'll do that once we add authentication in our application. But for now, this is good enough. So this is an async action. It will take some time to process. So we can tap a .then method at the end here. So we can say .then, and our response which we will get is the to-do that we just created. So we can access this to-do and do something with it. And what we will do is that we will simply dispatch an action. We will continue the dispatch. So dispatch, I invoke this, pass an object here, and the type of our dispatch right here is add to do. And then we can also include the to do that we just got from the backend. So just a quick recap. Redux Dunk allow us to return a function in here. So we halt the dispatch, and then we perform an async action using Axios. We post a new to do using the post method, which accept the first parameter as the endpoint, and then the second parameter as the body of our request or our to do. Okay, and then we tap a .then method. Since this is an async action, we get a to do as a response, and we continue the dispatch here, and the type of our action is add to do. We can be able to access this add to do from our reducers and be able to update state accordingly depending on the argument. And in case of an error, we can catch that error. So right here we can also tap .catch. We have access to the error object. We set an arrow function, and we can log this error to the console. So console.log error.response, just like that. Now this is our action creator for adding a new to do, and to dispatch this to do from our add to do component, we need to make use of a Redux hook. Initially we used to do some crazy stuff at the bottom here, map state to props and some other crazy things, but with Redux hook it is much easier to now dispatch an action from this particular file. So what I'll do is that I'll import use dispatch, which is a Redux hook, from Redux library. So right here I'll say import ID structure use dispatch, and this will be from React Redux library. Sorry, I had said Redux library, but it's from React Redux. Okay, so yeah, now we can use this hook at the bottom here. Just right here I'll create a constant, call it dispatch, and I'll set it to be equal to use dispatch hook, and I need to invoke our hook here, just like that. Now I can make use of this dispatch. So instead of logging a to do to the console, we will dispatch an action creator. Okay, so right here we'll say dispatch, we invoke it, and we pass an action creator in here, which is our add to do action creator. So what we can do is to import this action creator in this file. So I'll come at the top, and then I'll import that add to do in here. So I'll say import ID structure add to do action creator, and this will come from the store actions. So right now we are inside the to-dos folder. We need to get out of these components, go to the store. Okay, that's a long way to go. Okay, let's do this. So right here double dots, and then another double dots, and from here we can access the store, and then we can access our actions, and then we can now access our to do actions. Perfecto. So now we can dispatch this add to do action creator right here. Okay, right here we dispatch add to do, we invoke it, and we pass our to do, this one right here, in here. So let me create some spacing so you can see what is happening. So now let me take you through the series of events that are happening. When we type something to the field, we hit submit. This on submit event will be fired. We run our handle submit function, which is this one right here. We prevent the default action, and then we dispatch an action creator, which is add to do, and we pass our to do in there, and then we reset our form. So this add to do action creator will receive that to do, which is this one, and then in here with the help of Redux Dunk we can post the dispatch, perform an async action using axios.post. The URL here is the endpoint. We pass our to do to the body of the request, and when this is received on the backend, it will be added to the database, and then we get a response, which is the to do that was added to the database right here. We continue the dispatch, and now we can update our state in our reducers using this information, the type of add to do and the to do. In case of an error, we catch the error and log it to the console. Now the last step that we can perform is to update the state, and we do this in our to do reducer. So right here, initially we just returned the state, but instead of doing this, we can check the action types and then update the state according to the action that we performed. So for now, I'll remove this one, and then we use a switch statement to switch through the action types. And then right here, we'll just say action dot type. We include different cases, and the case right now is for adding a new to do. So right here, add underscore to do, and this must be the same as this one. Okay, if you have a typo, some things won't work as we want them to. And then for our add to do, we can be able now here to return the updated state. So we can say return. We want to return an array of our to-dos. So right here we can return an array. We spread our different to-dos available in the state, and then we add our new to-do which we are receiving. Okay, so here we should have a full colon so that that error disappear. So right here, what I'll say is action. We will have a property called data, and then we can access the to do, and then I spread the state, so we add it inside the state. So yeah, just like that. So this is the case for adding a new to do, and we should also have a default case. So right here we can say default full colon. We simply return the state, so return state. I'll save this file, and at this point we can test our application, but we need to have our backend server running, okay, because we are trying to access our backend when we perform this action using this URL. So I'll come to my folder here where we have our MERN application. I open the backend folder, and then at the path hit cmd, and we run our backend using nodemon. Now our backend is successfully running, server running on port 5000 and Mongo connection established. So we can go to the browser, and yeah, we have an error here. I guess it haven't completely updated. It shouldn't display an error. So I'll refresh this one manually and see if everything will go along. So yeah, here we are. This is our application. We have added logic for our form here, and we want to see if we can add a to-do to the database. So first of all, I'll come to my database and confirm that it is empty. So collections here, and retrieving collections. We have our to-do database, and users are empty. We don't have anything actually. Okay, so let's try and add a to-do. So right here, I'll enter new to-do, hit submit. We get undefined here from to-do actions, but let's check our database and see if we get something. I need to refresh. I'll hit refresh here. And now we have to-dos here. When I check our to-dos, loading documents, perfect. So you can see that we are adding a to-do to the database. Name, new to-do is complete false, date, and this is awesome. We can add a new to-do to our database, and that I think meets the goal of this section. Now in the next section, we can see how we can read those to-dos from the database. So in the last section, we were able to use our form to add a new to-do to the database. And in this section, I want us to see how we can get that data from the database and add it to our application state. But before we do that, we made a mistake on our to-do reducer, and I want us to correct that mistake, and then we'll continue with this section. So I'll come to my code editor here, and this is where we made a mistake. We said action.data.todo, but in our action we don't have a property called data. If I come to do actions.js, you'll see that we are dispatching an action which will have a type and to do. So the properties that we have is action.type and action.todo. We don't have data. So what is supposed to be here is action.todo. And then inside our to do is where we'll have a property called data. So yeah, that's it, and we can verify this by logging our action to the console. So just before our return statement, we can say console.log, and we log our action in here. So when we add a new to do, we should be able to log our action to the console. So I'll come back to the app and manually refresh it just to make sure it have refreshed. I'll add a dummy to do, new to do, submit, and it should log to the console here. Yeah, there we go. So you can see we have an action which will have a property called type and another property called to do. And when I expand this one, you'll see our to do have more properties, and one of them is data, and the data carries the details of our to do. Perfect. Now you understand why we are doing action.do.data. So I'll remove this, and now we can figure out how we can get the data from the backend and include it in our application state. So we'll start by creating an action creator called get-to-dos, and we'll use this action creator to get our data from the backend. So right here, just like we did with our add to do action creator, I will export a function called get-to-dos. It will be an arrow function, and it will not be receiving any data in here. And then in here is where we will return a function with the help of Redux Dunk, and then we'll use Axios to get our to-dos. So I'll simply copy what we have here just to make our work easier and paste it in here. And we can customize this to fit our needs. We won't be needing the state in this one. And then we'll use a method called get instead of post. We pass in the URL for our endpoint, which is this one, and we don't have any data that we are sending to the backend. What we get back after this process is our to-dos, an array of our to-dos. So we tap a dot then, and then we get our to-dos, and then we continue the dispatch here. Type will be get to-dos. And then we pass our to-dos so that we can access it in our reducers and update the state accordingly. In case of an error, we catch it. So now I'll come to the to-do reducer. We include a case for get to-dos, full colon at the end here, and then we return action dot todos dot data, just like that. Now this will properly update our state with the to-dos array. Okay, but now we need to figure out a way of dispatching this action creator from our UI. For our add to do, it was super simple. We had a submit button. Okay, when we click the submit button, we called a handler, and in that handler function is where we dispatched add to do. So how will we do that in get to dos? I'll come to our components folder, go to to dos, and then list to dos component. And we will use a hook available in React called use effect. And this use effect hook will be called every time our component renders. And once it is called, we'll be able to dispatch our action creator from there. So let's come at the top here and import use effect from React. And we will also need the use dispatch hook from React Redux so that we can dispatch our action creator. So right here, I'll also import use dispatch. And this will be coming from React Redux library. And another thing that we will need from React Redux library is the use selector hook. So right here, I'll also import use selector. And this hook will enable us to select a piece of state from the Redux store. And we need to also import our action creator from to-do actions.js. So at the bottom here, let's import our action creator, which is get to dos. So this will be coming from the store. I go one level up, another level up, I go to the store, and then I access our actions, and then I go to the to-do actions. Okay, so to-do actions here. Now let's make use of these imports. So I'll come at the bottom here and I'll set a constant called dispatch, which will be equal to use dispatch, and I invoke that hook. And then we can select the state from the Redux store. So I can set the state const state will be equal to use state. We invoke this hook, and then right here we'll pass an arrow function which will have access to the state. Okay, and this is the state from the Redux store, and we can return this state just like this, just like that. So this state will be equal to this state which is being returned, and we can log this state to the console. So right here I can say console.log state. Later on I will show you how we will select the to-do state directory so that we can make use of it in this component. But for now, this is good enough to see whether we are getting our to-dos from the backend and adding them to the application state. Now the last thing that remains is to dispatch our get to-dos, and we will do that by calling the use effect hook just right here. So I'll say use effect, invoke this hook, and in here I can pass an arrow function which will be called when the application renders. Okay, and right here we can use the dispatch, invoke it, and then we call our get to dos action creator and also invoke it. This is dispatch. Now this dispatch will be called when our component renders, because use effect will also be called when our component renders, and we'll be able to log the state to the console. So we can go to our app and see whether we are logging the state to the console and whether we are getting our to-dos in our state. Okay, so I am getting an error of use state is not defined. So I made a typo. This is not supposed to be use state, it is supposed to be use selector. Okay, sorry for that. This is the hook that we use to select the state from our Redux store, and we imported it at the top here from React Redux. So it is not use state, it is use selector. Our application is successfully running. I'll open the console to see whether state is being logged to the console, and I can already see that we have an error, and the error is saying failed to load resource. The server responded with a status of 4.1 unauthorized, and this is because we cannot access this endpoint. Okay, we can't get our to-dos from these endpoints, and the reason is because we had protected our backend with authentication. So how we can resolve this for now is by going to our backend code and make some changes so that we can be able to access it, and then later on we will make it private again when we get to authentication section of our application. So I'll come to my backend right here. I'll stop the server and I'll open the code with Visual Studio Code. So if you don't know how we created the backend, I recommend you go to my channel, check the other videos in this series, and you'll see how we came up with our backend. We created the to-dos API and also the Auth APIs. Okay, so here is our get API endpoint, and you can see that we had protected it with Auth, unlike our other API endpoints. So that's why we were able to post a to-do to the backend, but we are not being able to get them from the backend. So we need to modify this for now, but later on we'll come and add it back. Also, that means that we don't have a user, so I'll remove the user, and I can comment this one out because we'll need it later on. Okay, so at this point we should now be able to get our to-dos from this endpoint. So now I'll close this file. Actually, I'll close the entire VS Code. That's what I meant. And then I'll rerun my backend using nodemon. Now our backend is up and running, and I refresh the application so that we can see whether our to-dos will be added to the application state. So I refresh here, and perfect. We have these to-dos, and it's being loaded on and on and on and on. We don't want this behavior. We don't want this behavior at all. So to stop this behavior, we can come to our code, and in our use effect we can add a comma, and right here we can add some options. Okay, so we want this use effect to load the first time, and then to prevent the reload we will use a dispatch here. Okay, so it will load again when we have a dispatch of our to-dos. Okay, so it won't keep on loading and loading and loading. It will load the first time, and then the next time it will load is when dispatch changes. So we can do something like this. Okay, so let's see if this will fix that issue. And you'll see that it loaded the first time, but it is not loading again until this dispatch changes, and this dispatch is called a dependency. Okay, we'll learn more about this later on, but for now let's see what we have in our to-dos. I'll expand the to-dos here, and you'll see that we have this property called to-dos, and it's an array of two to-dos which are available in our database. And this property is here because in our root reducer, so if I can come to the root reducer here, we added this property to-dos in our root reducer, and we set it to to-do reducer, which is updating our to-dos state. So this to-dos is the one that is appearing just right here, and now we can directly access this piece of state from the store, just like this. So instead of loading the entire state right here in our list to dos, we can set a constant to be equal to dos, and then we use selector, we get the entire state, but right now we select the to dos state only. Okay, so later on we'll be having even the auth state, but we only want to select the to dos only. And now I can log the to dos to the console. Okay, which is an array of those to dos. So now I can come back here, and we have an error, state is not defined, line 23. I think we just changed that, so this should resolve. Now you can see that we are getting an array of our to-dos directory. Okay, now in the next section I'll show you how we can map through these to-dos and display them on the screen. Okay, in the last section we were able to get our data from the database and included it in our application state in form of an array. So this is very awesome, because in this section I want us to take this data from the state and display it on our UI. And before we get started, I want you to install another library which will help us to format the dates. So you can see this is the timestamp of our date, and it is hard to read in this form. So I want it to be in a much more readable form, just like this one, and moment will help us to do that. So just go to your terminal and install moment, and you can see I have already installed mine. Just run npm I moment, and that should install moment in your application. Once moment is installed, now you can go back to your code editor, and we are still in the todos.jsx component. And this is how we are getting our to-dos from the state. So we use the use selector hook from React Redux. We have access to state, and we specifically get to-dos from the state. Okay, what we want to do is to conditionally render our to-do component depending on whether we have to-dos or not. And also we can conditionally render this this title right here. Okay, so let's start with the title. I remove this one, and we can do something like this. We can check the length of our to-dos. So we can say I'll include these brackets because we are writing JavaScript code in here, and then we can say to-dos dot length. So this will get the length of our array. Okay, right now we have 2 to-dos in our array, so the length will be 2. So if the length is greater than 0, we use this operator. Okay, if this is true, we will display the title that we had there, the to-dos. Else we will display this message, no to-dos yet. Okay, so how this operator is working is, if this is true, if this check is true, we will have the to-dos. That means that we have to-dos in our array. Else we will display this one. Okay, and that's all that we have for the title. And then we don't need to press multiple to do here, so I remove that. All we need to do is to use an array method called map. Okay, so we'll do something like this. I include these brackets because we are writing JavaScript code inside our JSX. I say to-dos end. So this will basically check whether we have to-dos or not. If we have to-dos, we will continue with whatever we are doing next. Okay, else this process will just be terminated. Okay, so if we have the to-dos, then we will do this todos dot map, and this is an array method which will help us to loop over our to-dos and display each to-do at a time. So when we map, we will get each to-do at a time. So in here we are using an arrow function, and then we can do something in here. Okay, we can include a return statement, and what we will return is this particular component. Okay, so if we have two to-dos, this component will be displayed twice. Okay, and for us to display the details of that particular to-do, we need to pass the properties of each of the to-do in this particular component. So right here, I'll just use a black so that we can clearly see what we are doing here. And the first thing that we can pass is our entire to-do. So right here, you can say to-do will be equal to to-do, and we can be able to read the properties of that to do in this particular component. And then we also need to have a key. So key, and key must be unique, so we can make use of the to do ID as a key. So right here we'll say to do dot underscore ID. So if I come to the browser here and check our ID, you'll see it have an underscore ID. Okay, and this ID is unique and it was auto generated by our MongoDB. Okay, so you don't need to worry about how this ID came along. So there we go. Now we have a to do and we have a key. Perfect. And these are the two props that we need so that we can display our to-do in the UI. Now at this point we are done with the list to-dos component, and the next thing that I want us to do is to jump to this particular component, our to-do component, and do some changes. So I'll go to the to-do component here, and at this point where we are creating our to-do component, we can receive that to-do that we passed as a prop right here. Okay, so this to do is the one that we passed here. Okay, this one. So we are passing it as a prop, and we can take it from the prop right here. So I am doing a destructuring right here. Okay, using these brackets, and we get our to do. And now we can use this to do and read its property and display it on the UI. So instead of learn React, we can do something like this, to do dot name. So this is one of the property. This is supposed to be a small cap, to do dot name, and this will give the name of our to do. And then for the author, currently we don't have an author for our to do. When we add authentication, we'll come and fix this. But for our date, we do have a date. Okay, so right here we can say added, and then I use the curly brackets here because it's JavaScript, and right here is where we are going to use moment. Okay, and the moment will help us to format our dates. So the first thing that we need to do is to import moment at the very top. So right here I'll import moment, from moment, just like that, and then I can use it here, moment. We invoke it, and in here we pass the timestamp of our to do, which will be available in to do dot date. And then at the end we include a method from now. And there are various ways that you can format the dates in moment, and you can check its documentation by going here and searching for moment. Okay, moment.js, and you can see the different methods which you can use in moment. So we have .calendar, and this is the one that we just used. From now, we have from now. Yeah, there are a lot of them. So depending on how you want to display your date, you can come to moment and check what is included in its documentation. Okay, perfect. Now this date will correctly display. Another thing that we can do is to conditionally render our buttons depending on whether a to-do is complete or not, and also we can conditionally render our name depending on whether a to-do is complete or not. So what we will do at this point is to add some styling at the top here where we had the make style hook. So we can add a few styles so that we can conditionally render depending on whether a to-do is complete or not. So right here you can say is complete, and this will help us to change the color of our button, and I'll set the color here to green. And then I can include a comma, and I'll include checked. So if it is a to-do is checked, we can change the text decoration, and I'll include this style line hyphen through. Okay, now to make use of this, we can come right here and check whether a to-do is complete or not. So I'll use the curly brackets, and we have a property called is complete. So to do dot is complete. If a to-do is complete, then we want to render a particular text, which is this one right here. So if it's complete, we want to render this. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just include a spacing here, select this one and move it at the top, and I should wrap it inside these brackets like that. I remove this spacing. So if to do is complete, we will display this component, which is a typography to do.name, else we will display this component. I'll include the brackets. So what I'll do, I'll just copy this one and paste it in here. Now the difference is in the styling. We want the first one here to have a line through because that to do is complete. So what we can do is to include a prop here called a class name, which will be equal to oops, sorry, this is supposed to be this way. So we'll have a class name which will be equal to classes dot checked, and this is the styling that we just added here. So this name will have a line through, else we will display this component at our typography here, but it won't have a line through. Okay, the next one is to conditionally render our button, the check circle button. So we will do a similar thing. To do dot is complete. We used our question mark here, and then we display our first component, which is this one. I'll copy it. I'll actually cut it and paste it here. Else I include a full colon. We will display a similar component. I'll copy that and paste it here, but the difference will be in our color, and we included a style for the color, which is this one, is complete color green. So to do is complete. If a to do is complete, we display this, else it is not complete, so we display this. So this is the point where a to-do is complete, so we should include our styling in this button. Actually it's our check circle we need to style, so right here I'll say class name and I'll set it to classes.isComplete. So just like that, if I save, Prettier will auto format my code. Yeah, and I hope you have understood this. If a to-do is complete, we will have a green check circle, else it will be grayed out. And then we'll also have this name properly formatted. And this is how we can dynamically display our to-do. So for now, I think we have achieved our goal. All we need to do is to run our application and test it out and see whether we are correctly displaying our to-dos. So I restart my development server right here. So npm start. So you can see our application is loading and currently we have no to-dos yet. When the to-dos loads, the title changes and then we have our to-dos listed at the bottom here. So perfect. You can see now we have new to-do. This is from the database and then added 20 hours ago. Then we have this one, new to-do. So yeah, and we can try to see if our is complete functionality is working. So we can go to the database and change the status of one of our to-do. So I have my database here. Okay, let it load. So right here we have all our to-do set as false. So for our new to-do here, the first one, we can change the value to true so that we see whether it will change to something else. So right here I can set it to true and update. It have updated. When I come back, we don't see the changes immediately, but we need to hit refresh. And you see now this is green because the status of our to-do have changed and we have a line through. So our display is working perfectly, but for the other until we add authentication is when we'll come and display it correctly. Now I want to show you something. If I add another to do, another one like DJ CRUD, I submit, it should appear right here, and there we go, another one. Yes, and it's a few seconds ago. So this is happening because we are correctly updating our state when adding a new to do. So if we come to our reducer to do reducer, you'll see that when we are adding a new to do, we took the existing to do's, which is this one, we spread them and add the new to do to the state, and once it's added to the state, it can correctly be displayed on our UI. Okay, so that's why we did this. Okay, perfect, and I hope now you understand why. Now in the next section I want us to see how we can update a to do. Okay, so far we can be able to add a to do to the database and also fetch that to do and display it on the screen. Now in this section I want us to see how we can edit a to do. And this will be a tricky one because we'll be using the same form for adding a to-do to edit a to-do. So when we click this edit button, I want us to populate our form here with the data of our to-do, and then we will need to figure out how we can differentiate whether we are adding a new to-do or we are updating a to-do. But don't worry, I'll try to go step by step so that you understand everything, and I am hoping everything will work out. Okay, so we will start by creating an action creator for editing a to do. So let's go to our code editor and open the to do actions. Now at the bottom here is where we can create an action creator for editing a to-do. What I'll do is that I'll just copy this one, the whole of this, copy, come at the bottom and paste it here. And then we can customize it to fit the update to do action creator. So here we'll say export const update to do, and then right here we will receive an updated to do, and also we will need to have an ID of that to do. So we'll also have an ID, and then we will return dispatch, and I don't think we'll be using get state in this one. And then right here we'll have Axios, and the method that we will use is put. And then we tap our endpoint, so we will have URL stroke to dos, and then for updating a to do we'll also need to pass the ID of the to do that we are trying to update. So right here I'll say stroke, I use the $sign and the curly brackets, and then I pass this ID of the to do that we are trying to update. So I press the ID there. So now this will be the endpoint for updating a to do, and then right here we will include the data of our to do, which is the updated to do. Okay, and what we will get back is a to do, and then the dispatch will have a type of updated to do or update to do. So this is an action, we can say update to do, and we can read the data of our to do on our reducers and update the state accordingly. Okay, so this to do will be different from this one, and that is because the action type will be update to do and not add to do. So don't worry about the similarity here, it won't affect our operation. And then in case of an error, we'll simply catch the error and log it to the console. And that's it. This is an action creator for updating our to do. Perfect. Now let's go to the next step of updating the state in our to do reducer. So just after our case here for adding a to do, we can include a case which will be update to do, and then at the end here a full colon, and we return something. So what I want us to do is to map through the to-dos that are available in our to-do reducer state. Okay, so this state is specifically for the to-do reducer, which is an array of our to-dos. So return, we read the state which contains an array of our to-dos. So we will say state.map, and then when we invoke this, we will loop through each to do. Okay, so remember this state contains an array of our to dos. Okay, and we can perform a check to see whether we are updating any to do in that particular array. So this is an arrow function, and we can do something in here, and what we will say is perform a check if to do dot underscore id, and this is from our state, and an already existing to do is equal to action dot to do dot data dot underscore id. Now this to do is the one that we have already updated in our action creator. Okay, so remember when we perform a then method here, this to do is the already updated to do, but it will have the same ID as the to do that already exists in our state. And remember what we are trying to do here is to update our state so that our UI can correctly also update. Okay, so if todo.id underscore id is equal to action.todo.data.underscore id, we can use the question mark here, which is our ternary operator. So if this is true, it means that we are trying to update a particular to do, or we have already updated a to do, which is this one. This is the updated to do. So if this is true, we will return the updated to do to our state. So right here we'll say action dot to do dot data, and this is our updated to do. So we will return that to do instead of the old to do. It's like replacing the old to do with this new to do. Else it means that we are not updating any to do. Okay, everything is remaining the same, so we will simply return our old to do. So right here we'll simply say return to do, and this is the to do which is available in the state. So just a recap, what we are doing here is that in the state we have an array of to-dos, and we want to select a particular to-do which we are updating and replace it with the new data. Okay, so right here we will map through each to-do, and then for example, if this is the first to-do, we will check it right here. We'll check its ID, and then we'll check the ID of the updated to do. If the ID does not match, we will return the old to do. Okay, so we won't change that to do, and then we will check the second one, maybe this one. Now maybe this one is the one that we actually updated, so we'll check its ID here, and we'll check if it's equal to the updated to do, and because it's the one that we have updated, the ID will be the same. So we will update that to do by replacing this old to do with this new data. Okay, and this one will be ignored. So we will replace that specific to do, and then the rest of the to do's will remain the same. And this is what is happening in this line, and hopefully you have understood what I have said. Okay, now this will correctly update our state, and then in our to do actions, this will correctly update our to do in the database. Now what remains is to figure out how we can dispatch this action creator from our UI. And the first thing that I'll do is that I'll come to the add to do component, and this is where we were adding a new to do. Okay, and for your information, we'll be making use of this same form right here to update our to do, because this is the same input field right here. But this component, this add to do component, will be somehow connected with our to do component, which is displaying the data. So when we click this button, we need to autofill this field with this data. And how we can do that is by using our set state right here, set state method. But when you look at our component tree, this todos.js is the parent of add to do and list to do's. Okay, this is the parent. So add to do and list to do are child of to do's, and that is how these two are related. And then to do is inside the list to do's. So what we can do, because we are making use of the same set state, this set state will update our field, this particular field, which is available in our add to do, and we need to make use of it in our to do component so that we can correctly autofill our form here when we click that button. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to perform something called raising the state. So we need to take this code out of here and take it to our parent component so that we can use set to do both on our to do here and also on our add to do.jsx file. So I'll copy this, actually not copying, I will cut it. Okay, so I'll cut this, and this is called raising the state, taking the to do from a child component to a parent component. And then we'll go to the todos.jsx file, and just before the return statement here is where we will define our state, just like that. But now we need to use this to do and set to do in these both components, and we'll do this by passing them as props. So right here in our add to do component, we will pass to do as a prop. So to do will be equal to do, and then set to do will be equal to set to do. Just like that, and we'll reuse this one. So I'll copy it, and we'll also need it right here. Actually, what we need in our list to do's is only set to do. I don't think we'll need to do right here. So let me just remove that, and we pass only set to do to this list to do. Now in our add to do component, we will receive to do and set to do as props. So I'll come back to the add to do component, and I'll receive them as props. So I'll destructure them. Right here we'll have to do, and we'll also have set to do. And with this we can correctly spread the to do, and also right here we can set to do and also spread it and add new values. So yeah, now the next step, I'll come back to the todos.jsx file. So the next step, we need to go to this list to do's component where we are receiving set to do as a prop. So I'll come to list to do's.jsx file, and we receive set to do as a prop. So right here, set to do. Okay, now we have that, and we also need to pass this set to do as a prop to our to do, because in our to do is where we have a button for updating a to do. So right here I'll pass set to do as a prop. So set to do will be equal to set to do, just like that. And now we can come to the to do file and do some state update. First of all, we destructure set to do from here. So set to do. Okay, perfect. And this to do was coming from mapping all our to do's. And yeah, now let's come to this to do file here and make use of set to do. Now at the bottom here where we have our button group, this is where we are having a button for for editing a to do. This create icon button is the one for editing a to do. We will add an on click event, and then we'll call a handler function, and we can call this handler function handle update click. Okay, here we'll have an arrow function and handle update click, and we invoke it. Okay, now when we click on this icon or this button, we will call the handle update click. So let's go ahead and create this function at the top here. I'll say const handle update click. It will be an arrow function, and then in here is where we can update the state of our to do. So we can make use of set to do, and we invoke it, and what we will pass here is the current to do that we are trying to update, and it is this to do right here. And remember, this to do was coming from our list to do component after we map through all the to do's. So we will get each to do at a time, and when we click on a button for that to do, we will update the state with it. Okay, so this should correctly update the state of our to do, and we can scroll at the top every time we click on that button by using this method. So we have access to the global object called window, so I can say window and then dot scroll to use an object in here, and we can set top to 0 and then left to 0. This is a comma, not a semicolon. And then lastly here, behavior smooth, so we want it to be a smooth scroll, so behavior to be smooth, just like that. Now when we click that button, we will set the state to this and we will scroll to the top. Now the next step is to come to our add to do component and perform a check whether we are creating a new to do or we are updating the to do. Remember, when we update the state of that to do, the value will be taken from that to do right here, okay, because it's the same state. So and I can see here we had use state and we removed it, so I can remove this use state. Actually I can just cut it and then go to our todos.jsx file, and we need to import it here because this is where we are using use state. Okay, perfect. So what I'm saying, this state is the same for add to do and rest to do. So when we update the state from here, this state is the one that will also be passed to our add to do component. When creating a new to do, this to do will not have an ID, but when we click the update button, this to do will be coming from the database and it will be having an ID, and that ID was auto-generated by MongoDB. So that is what we are going to use to differentiate between whether we are creating a new to do or we are trying to update a to do. So let's come to our add to do component, and where we are submitting the to do, we will perform a check and then perform a dispatch depending on whether we are adding a new to do or we are updating a to do. So right here I can just say if to do dot underscore id exists. If it exists, it means that we are updating our to do. If it does not exist, it means that we are trying to create a new to do which does not have an ID yet. Okay, so we'll do something in here. So in here is where we can perform a dispatch of updating the to do. Else we will dispatching this to do right here. Okay, so you can see the difference. Now we need to import our action creator for updating a to do, and the action creator was update to do, and they are coming from the same file. So just use a comma and then update to do, and right here we can reassign to do.id to be simply id. So I can say const id will be equal to do dot underscore id, and then we can define the properties of our updated to do. So right here we can say updated to do. Actually I can just say const updated to do will be equal to, we set the properties of our updated to do, and an updated to do should have all the properties that we included on the backend so that it does not throw an error. Remember, updating a to do means that we are replacing the entire to do. specifically when we use the put method, okay, instead of patch. So I can set the name to be todo.name, and then is complete will be todo.is complete. Date will be todo.date, and then author, in this case we can manually set the author to be a string because we don't have an author yet. I can set it to Chaoo, and later on we can also add a UID when we add authentication in our system, but for now this will do. And you might be asking yourself, why can't we just pass this to do right here? Now this to do have a property called version, and in our backend we did not include a version property that was automatically added by MongoDB, and that version might throw some errors. So that's why I did this, and yeah, it will work when we do this. When we pass it directly, it will throw an error. Now the only thing that remains is to just dispatch our updated to do using the dispatch right here. So right here I can just say dispatch. We can just say dispatch. We invoke it, update to do, and in here we pass updated to do, updated to do, and also we pass the ID of our to do, which is this one here, ID. Okay, so our action creator will receive the updated to do and the ID, and then we will correctly update the to do. And when I come back to add to do.jsx, I also want us to change some things, and it is right here, the date. So when we are updating a to do, I don't want us to set a new date. I want us to reuse the old date. But when adding a new to do, I want us to set a new date. So what I'll do, I'll just cut this just like that, and I'll update the date right here when adding a new to do. Okay, so right here I can just say const new to do will be equal to, I spread the properties of our to do, and then I use a comma and I set the date. Okay, sorry, I use a comma and I set a date to be new date. Now with this implementation, this date will be the old date of our to do. Maybe you can add a date for when the to do was updated, but for now this works. And then this one is the date of adding a new to do. And the way we are differentiating whether we are adding a new to do or we are updating the to do is by using the ID. Okay, remember when you click the edit icon, okay, we will populate our form with the existing to do, and that existing to do will have an ID, and then we can check if the ID exists. If it exists, we know we are updating the to do, and we will perform a dispatch of this action creator. Else it means that we are creating a new to do and we haven't gotten an ID yet, because that to do does not exist in the database. So we create a constant here called new to do. We pass the data of the to do, and this is the new to do, so it means that it will only have the name. Okay, so it will only have the name and is complete, which was the default. So we will have that, and then we'll add a date, and then when we send it to the backend, an ID will be automatically assigned to it. And then right here we dispatch the to do, and we have renamed this one to new to do, so we need to also rename this to new to do. and in our to do actions, I'll come at the top and rename this one to new to do. But if you left it as to do, it would also work, but for consistency we can rename it to new to do, and we add the new to do to the database, just like that. Now one more thing that we might have messed up is in our to do reducer. So this was correct, the implementation here is correct, but we should directly return this without these curly brackets, otherwise it will throw an error. Okay, so remove that and we should have something like this. We are directly returning this line, and that's it. At this point I am hoping this should work. It should correctly update our to do. So I'll run my development server and test this application on our browser. Now our application have loaded. When we hit one of these buttons, we should populate this form with our to do. So let's try this one. I hit it and perfect, we are populating the data with this to do, and the data here now will have an ID. And when we try to submit this, what will happen is that we will check if there is an ID, and then we will dispatch the appropriate action creator. So let's try to perform an update, maybe old to do, submit, and you can see that the data here changed to old to do. So perfect, we are perfectly updating our to do with this implementation. So when I click this one, you can see another one, and maybe we can change to something like learn redux. I submit, and this should update to learn redux. So we are perfectly updating our to do. Now that's it. That's how we can update the to do. I hope everything was clear, and I'll see you on the next section, where maybe we can move from the logic section and try to add the React toastify, so that we can see messages of actions we perform in our application. And then after that, we will quickly perform marking to do as done and also deleting a to do. In this section, I want us to do something fun, which is adding some toast messages in our application. So all you need to do is to come to your terminal, and then you run this command npm I react toastify, and this will install React toastify in your application. You can see I have already done that, and I am using version 7.0.3. Now let's make use of this library. The first thing that you'll need to do is to go to app.js, and at the very top we will import a component from React toastify called toast container. So just right here I will say import toast container, and this is from React toastify. Another thing that we need to import is the React toastify CSS file, and this is how we import it. You will say import, you use these quotes, and then React toastify stroke dist stroke React toastify .css. Now let's load this component just right here after our browse router. So right here you'll say toast container, just like that. Okay, and then now we can make use of a toast object to display different messages in our application. So what we need to do is to jump to do actions.js, and in addition to logging a message to the console, we will also toast an error message. So right here we will toast an error message, but before we do that, we need to import the toast object from React toastify. So let's go at the very top and import it. So I'll import ID structure toast from React toastify, and then now we can make use of this toast. And I want us to toast error messages for add to do and also for update to do when a user performs an action. So for add to do, when we log the message to the console, we can also toast an error. So we'll say toast dot error, and then the error message will be available in error object dot response. And then we have another property called data. Okay, and with this we will get the error message which we customarily added on our backend. But sometimes this response may not always be there, and it may take some time to process. Now, to safely load this error message, we can use something we called an optional chaining operator. So right here we will include a question mark and then a dot data. Now when the response is available in our error message, we will safely load the message, else this will be just undefined and no errors will be thrown. Okay, and this is called optional chaining. You can read more on it, and also we can change the default position of this error message. So right here I can include an object, and then I set a property called position, and a full colon, we say toast dot position, and then dot bottom. You can see the different options that are there: bottom center, bottom left. What I want is bottom right. So yeah, this is it. So I can just copy this and paste it right here. It's just the same thing, but it will load different error messages. Now this is in case of errors. In case of a successful operation, we will go to our reducers. So to do reducers or to do reducer, and we will toast a message here. So first of all, we need to import the toast. So I'll come to the to do actions again and copy this line, and then in our reducers I'll paste it at the very top. Now for our add to do, we can say toast dot success, and then we can enter a custom message, and all we will say is a to do was added. And I can include 3 dots, and then we can position this at the bottom right. So position full colon toast dot position, and then dot bottom right. And now if we successfully add a to do, this message will be shown. So I can copy this and paste it on our update to do, and the message will be now a to do was updated. Okay, now we can test our application and see if these toast messages will appear. Okay, now I'll go back to the browser, and I'm hoping that it have refreshed. Let's try to add a new to do, maybe learn CSS, submit, and perfect. A to do was added, a green toast message, and you can see learn CSS here. Let's try to edit. Maybe we wanted to say learn JS, submit, it's updated, a to do was updated. Let's invoke an error. When we enter like 2 characters, this won't go through because on our backend we had set a minimum of 3, so we should get an error. Submit and name, length must be at least 3 characters long. So you can see we are getting this message from the backend. Now in this section I want us to mark a to do as done or not done, or checking a to do. But before we do that, if you want to avoid these outputs, you can come to list to do's component and remove this console.log message, okay, and that should do it. And to mark a to do as done, we need an action creator for that. So I'll come to do actions.js, and I'll scroll at the bottom here. I'll just copy the whole of this action creator and paste it at the bottom, and then we'll customize it to fit our needs. So this we can call it check to do, and all we will have is an ID of the to do that we are trying to mark as done or not done or to toggle, and then we'll return a dispatch and we'll use Axios. This time the method is patch, and this will be our endpoint together with the ID, but we won't be sending any to do to the backend. We will simply send an empty object, but we won't be using it on the backend. We will be using the ID to access the to do from the backend, and then updating the is complete property by doing a toggle. And then right here we'll tap a then method, and we will get a to do that have already been updated, and the only thing that will be updated is that is complete property. And then we will dispatch a type of maybe check to do, and then we will also pass this to do together with the type, okay, and we can use these 2 properties to correctly update the state, and this will remain as it is to display the error. Now let's go to the reducer, which is right here, and how we will perform an update for that check to do is the same way that we did for this case, okay. So all I'll do, I'll copy the entire of this case and duplicate it at the bottom here. I'll use Alt Shift and the bottom arrow, and then right here I'll just change the case to check to do, and then we can send a message here of a to do status was changed. And then the position of our toast will be there, and these will remain as it is. Now the only thing that remains is to dispatch our action creator from our UI, and we'll do this in our to-do.jsx file. So when we click the check circle button, we will call a helper function which will dispatch our action creator. So I'll come right here, and this is where we performed a check, and I want to change something so that we can easily do this. Okay, instead of adding on click event on two buttons, we can remove this button. We can also remove this one, and then I can take this at the very top before our check here, and I can take this at the bottom after our check. And if I save this, it will be properly auto formatted, so you can see what is happening. We only have one button, but the icon is the one that will be conditionally be rendered. And now we can only add one on click event on this one button. So right here I can say on click, which will be equal to, I use these curly brackets, an arrow function, and we can call our helper method handle check, and we should pass the ID of the to do that we are trying to check. So I can say to do dot underscore ID, and now we can create this function real quick at the top here. So right here I'll say const handle check, and this will be an arrow function, and right here we will receive the ID, and then in here is where we dispatch our action creator. So we don't have dispatch imported in this file, so we need to import use dispatch hook from React Redux. And then I can make use of use dispatch right here, which will be equal to use dispatch. We invoke that and we dispatch our action creator right here. Actually, we should also import our action creator. I'll just import it at the bottom here, which is check to do, and this will come from our store stroke actions stroke to do actions, just like that. Now we can dispatch it, and I invoke it. So now when we click this button, we will call, why is it this one? When we click this button, we will call handle check. We'll pass the ID of that to do, and we are receiving that ID here. We can rename it to be just ID. We dispatch the check to do action creator, and we should also pass that ID right here, so that in our action creator we will receive that ID and properly update our to do. Okay, and it will only update that one property of is complete. So at this point we can test our application and see if everything works. So I'll come back here, and maybe do a manual refresh. Let's try to mark learn.js as done. So I'll click check, and a to do status was changed, but you can see this icon did not change. Okay, so if I mark this as done, a to do status changed, but this icon did not change. What about if I refresh? So you can see that they were actually updated at the backend, but our state is not properly being updated. So I have taken a look as to why our UI is not updating correctly whenever we press this check icon. Okay, so when I check, the to-do will actually update, but our UI is not updating correctly until we refresh, and that is a bad user experience. So I have checked at my front-end code right here, and everything is fine. There is no issue with the front-end code. The reason why it is not updating correctly is because what we are getting here from the backend is still our old to-do instead of the updated to-do. So in our to-do reducer, when we try to update the state here, we are updating the state with the old to-do instead of the new to-do. So the issue is on our backend. So you can open the backend code and then go to todos.js, and at our router.patch, this is where we were marking a to-do as done. Let me expand this because it's looking weird. Yeah, perfect. So this is where we were marking a to-do as done. We were taking the ID and getting that to do from the database. So this is the to do, and then we performed an if statement. If the to do does not exist, we return this message to the client, else we update the to do using these lines of code. So we await to do dot find by ID and update. We use the ID, which is request.params.id, this one which we pass in our URL, and then we change the is complete, okay, by negating this one. So if to do dot is complete is false, we change it to true, else we change it to false. Okay, but what we are missing is that we miss this kind of a flag, new to true, and this flag will enable us to return the updated to do instead of the old to do. So this will be the old to do instead of the updated to do. For this to be the updated to do, we need to pass a new flag just like this one. So we will include a comma here and then paste that flag. Okay, and this flag we included it here when we were editing a to do. So this is our put request endpoint. And if you don't know how we did all this, go back to this series and watch some of my previous videos in this series so that you can get to understand how we created these endpoints, and this should fix it. Okay, so if I check my server here, it's restarting, and I think I can close this one because I'm not using it. So once this one starts, we can test our front end right here. So now I will refresh this one so that we can get our application state correctly. And now let's try to mark this as done. We should correctly update our state. I mark it as done, and there we go. Now it's going through. I mark this one as not done, and there we go. So now everything is working for marking a to do as done. In the next section, we are going to delete a to do. So in this section, we are going to try and delete a to do, and the first thing that we are going to do is to create an action creator. So I'll open the to do action creator, and what I'll do is that I'll copy the whole of this code and paste it at the bottom here. We change the name of check to do to delete, and here we will receive the ID of the to do that we want to delete. We return a function. We use axios.delete method, and right here we'll only pass the URL. We don't need this empty object, so I'll remove that. And then right here we will just dispatch an action of type delete. Okay, so we don't need to pass any to do here, so I'll just dispatch an action of type delete, and then I'll pass this ID of that to do right here, and then we catch the error. Okay, and this is the action creator for deleting a to do. Now let's go to our to do reducer and update the state. So right here I'll copy this code for checking a to do and paste it at the bottom. I will save so that we can correctly auto format it and change the name of the case here to delete to do. Right here we will toast a message a to do was deleted, and then for updating our state we will use an array method called filter. Okay, so right here instead of using map we will use filter dot filter, and then right here we will filter our to-dos and exclude the to-do that we just deleted. And how we'll do that is by doing this to-do dot underscore id, and this is the to-do that is available in our array of our to-dos. Right here this is the state of our to-dos, and it's an array of those to-dos. So we'll get the to-do from the array and we'll exclude a to-do that we just deleted. So right here I'll say if to-do.id is not equal to action.id, just like this, and I remove this part just like this. So what this code will do is that it will exclude the to-do._id that matches action.id. Okay, it will return all those to-dos that does not match with this particular id, and this action.id is the one that we have included in our action creator here. So action.id, and this code should correctly update our state. So for now we need to figure out a way of dispatching our delete to do, and we'll do that on the UI where we have an icon for deleting a to do. So right here first of all we will import the delete action creator right here, which is delete to do, and then at the bottom here where we have our delete icon we will add an onClick event which will be equal to an arrow function, and right here we can call handle a delete helper function. We currently don't have this function, so we can create it here. Actually I'll just duplicate this. So this function will be handle delete, and then it will receive an ID, so we need to pass the ID of the to do that we are trying to delete here, like we did in handle check, to do dot underscore ID, and then at the top we dispatch the delete action creator just like that, and then we pass the ID. So that ID will be received right here. We will perform an axios.delete, and then this is the endpoint where we pass also the ID, and then we'll dispatch an action of type delete and we pass the ID here. And when we come to our reducers, we will use the filter method to exclude that to do in our state, so that we only have those to dos that are not deleted. Now, yeah, that's it. Now we can test this application. So let's try to delete a to do, this one. A to do was deleted and it's gone, it's not here. Let's try to delete old to do. It's gone, it's gone, it's gone, and our delete functionality is working. We can confirm this by going to our database. Now we should not have any to dos. So I'll come here and hit refresh, or at the top, and the query result is 0. We don't have any to dos in our database. And I guess now we have achieved the goal of this whole video, which was about CRUD operations. We can create a new to do. We can update this new to do using this icon. We can mark a to do as done, and also we can delete a to do. Now in the next video is when we will handle authentication. So we'll see how we can sign in a user, sign up a user, sign out a user, and also perform other auth functionalities in our application. So thank you for watching. If you like the video, please leave a thumbs up and remember to subscribe.